For 2 decades, the Duke mourned his lost bride until a young woman arrived wearing her ring. He saw the ring first, the sapphire catching afternoon light through the drawing room window, set in gold so distinctive there could be no mistake. 20 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. The Duke of Ashmore's hand trembled as he set down his brandy, his eyes fixed on the slender hand of the young woman his housekeeper had just shown in. She couldn't be more than 23, with chestnut hair and gray eyes that held none of Isabel's warmth. Yet there it was, the ring he'd placed on his bride's finger the morning she disappeared. The ring that had haunted his dreams for 2 decades, that had searched for across 3 continents, that represented the only woman he'd ever loved and the greatest mystery of his life. "Where did you get that?" His voice came out raw, accusatory. The young woman looked down at her hand, confused, then back at him with something like fear. "My mother gave it to me before she died. She said it was the only thing of value she owned, and that someday someone might recognize it. Your Grace, my name is Clara Hastings, and I think," she drew a shaking breath, "I think my mother was your missing bride." Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. The Duke stood frozen, a man carved from ice and old grief. At 52, Marcus Thorne, Duke of Ashmore, was still imposing. Tall, silver-touched at the temples, with the kind of austere handsomeness that came from good bones and better breeding. But his eyes, those dark hazel eyes that society matrons still whispered about, held a depth of sorrow that 20 years had only deepened. "Sit down," he commanded, his voice barely controlled, "and tell me everything. Start with your mother's name." Clara Hastings lowered herself into the chair across from him, her worn traveling dress and nervous hands marking her as someone far removed from the aristocratic circles the Duke inhabited. Yet she held herself with quiet dignity, like someone who'd learned early that pride was sometimes all you had left. Her name was Isabel Hastings, though she said that wasn't her birth name. She never told me what it was. Clara's voice was steady, despite her obvious nervousness. "She died 3 months ago in a village north of Manchester. Consumption. Before she passed, she told me stories about her past, fragmented things, memories she'd kept locked away my entire life." "What did she tell you?" Marcus leaned forward, every muscle taut. 20 years. 20 years of not knowing, of searching, of living with the terrible uncertainty of whether Isabel had left him willingly or had been taken, of wondering if she was alive or dead, happy or suffering, thinking of him or having forgotten entirely. She said she'd been engaged to a duke, that the wedding was planned for June, that she'd been so in love she thought her heart would burst from it. But then something happened. She was always vague about what. She said she woke up in a strange place, miles from London, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. She was hurt, Your Grace, badly hurt. Someone had beaten her, left her for dead on the side of a road. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. No, we searched. I hired investigators, Bow Street runners, private agents. We combed London and the surrounding counties for months. If she'd been found injured, she wasn't found by anyone looking for Lady Isabel Pemberton. Clara met his eyes directly. She was found by a traveling tinker who took her to his sister's house in a village so small it didn't even have a name on most maps. She had no identification, no memory of who she was beyond fragments. She knew her first name, knew she'd been happy, knew someone was waiting for her. But she didn't know where or who. Isabel Pemberton. Marcus spoke his lost bride's name like a prayer and a curse. Your mother was Isabel Pemberton, daughter of the Earl of Pemberton. We were to be married on June 15th, 1805. She disappeared on June 10th, 5 days before the wedding. She left her father's London house to go to the dressmaker's for a final fitting. She never arrived. The coach was found abandoned near Blackfriars, the driver and footman murdered, Isabel gone without a trace. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Murdered? She never said. Because she didn't know. If she lost her memory, if she was taken and left for dead. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Beyond the glass, Ashmore Park stretched in manicured perfection, hundreds of acres of wealth and privilege that had meant nothing without Isabel. Tell me about your mother's life, where she lived, how she lived. Tell me everything. So Clara told him. She spoke of growing up in poverty in a series of small northern villages, of her mother taking in sewing and laundry, of the quiet sadness that always clung to Isabel like a shadow. She spoke of her mother's educated accent that didn't match their circumstances, of the way she knew French and could play piano when she got near one, of the fragments of memory that would surface unexpectedly, a snatch of a song, a description of a grand house, tears over a name she couldn't quite remember. She never married? Marcus asked quietly. No, she said she couldn't, that somewhere in her lost memories was a man she'd loved with her whole heart, and marrying anyone else would be a betrayal even if she couldn't remember his name. Clara's voice softened. She was lonely, Your Grace, terribly lonely, but she was also kind and good, and she loved me fiercely. Whatever life she lost, she built something beautiful with what remained. But she suffered. It wasn't a question. Marcus could see it in the worn state of the ring, in Clara's threadbare clothes, in the weight of hardship that sat on this young woman's shoulders. She suffered because someone took her from me, and I couldn't find her, couldn't protect her, couldn't give her the life she deserved. She also loved, Clara said firmly. She loved me, loved the few friends we had, found joy in small things. It wasn't the life she was meant for, but it was a life, Your Grace. She made it mean something. Marcus turned to face her, this girl who had her mother's bones, but not her coloring, her mother's quiet dignity, but not her aristocratic bearing. Who was your father? Clara flinched. I don't know. Mother would never say. I used to think she'd been married briefly, that had died, but as I grew older, I realized she wasn't widowed. She trailed off, unwilling to say the word. She was violated. Marcus said it flatly, voicing the horror he'd been piecing together. Someone took her, hurt her, left her to die. When she survived, she found herself alone, pregnant, with no memory and no way back to her old life. I think so, yes. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. She loved me, but sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with such sadness. I think I reminded her of what she'd lost, even though she couldn't remember exactly what that was. Marcus sank back into his chair, the weight of 20 years of grief and guilt pressing down on him like a physical thing. Isabel had been alive all this time, alive and suffering, struggling to survive, raising a child alone in poverty, while he'd lived in comfort at Ashmore Park, drowning his sorrow in duty and drink. Why did you come here? He asked. Why now, after all this time? Because Mother made me promise. Before she died, she said if the ring meant something to someone, if someone recognized it, I should find them. She said she couldn't give me wealth or position or a proper name, but she could give me the truth, even if she didn't fully know it herself. Clara pulled a folded paper from her worn reticule. She also gave me this. She'd written it over the years, every fragment of memory that came back to her. It's not much, but it might help you understand what happened to her. Marcus took the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was Isabel's. He'd have known it anywhere, though it was shakier than he remembered, marked by years of hard labor and illness. He unfolded it carefully and began to read. I remember roses, white roses everywhere, and being so happy I could barely breathe. I remember a man with kind eyes. He called me his morning star. I remember a dress made of silk, the color of cream. I was going to wear it. Someone was waiting. I remember a coach, dark inside, hands grabbing me, a cloth over my face that smelled sweet and wrong. I remember pain, so much pain, and darkness. I remember waking in a place I didn't know, with people I didn't recognize, and everything before was fog and fragments. I remember knowing I'd lost something precious, someone precious, but I couldn't remember who. I remember the ring, how it felt right on my finger, like it belonged there, like someone had put it there with love. If you're reading this, I'm gone, but the ring remains. If someone recognizes it, if someone comes looking for the woman who wore it, tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I tried to remember. Tell them they were loved, even in the forgetting. The paper fell from Marcus's hands. He pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back tears he hadn't shed in years. The Duke of Ashmore didn't weep. He'd taught himself iron control in the months and years after Isabel's disappearance. But this was too much. Your Grace? Clara's voice was gentle, uncertain. That was our engagement ring, Marcus said hoarsely. I gave it to her 3 months before the wedding. She said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She wore it every day, never took it off. She said as long as she wore it, she'd carry a piece of me with her. He looked up at Clara, no longer trying to hide his tears. I was the man with kind eyes. I called her my morning star because she made everything brighter just by existing. The white roses were everywhere at her father's house, her favorite flower. And the dress. He choked on the words. The dress was her wedding gown. Cream silk with Brussels lace. She was going for the final fitting when she was taken. Clara was crying now too, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry this happened to both of you. Why are you apologizing? You're as much a victim of this as she was, more so. You grew up in poverty, without a father's name, because of someone's evil. Marcus wiped his face roughly. What happened to Isabel after the tinker found her? How did she end up raising a child alone? Clara hesitated, then spoke carefully. The tinker's sister, Mrs. Grady, took her in. Mother was pregnant by then, though she didn't realize it at first. Mrs. Grady was kind, let her stay, helped her through the pregnancy. But the village was small, and an unwed mother was scandalous even to kind people. After I was born, we moved on. Mother found work where she could, and we survived. We moved every few years when people's charity wore thin or their judgment grew too heavy. But we survived, Your Grace. She made sure of that. Marcus stood again, his mind racing. 20 years! Isabel had been alive for some of those years. How many he didn't know. She'd been suffering, struggling, remembering him in fragments, while he'd been here, refusing to marry because no one could replace her, building a mausoleum of grief disguised as duty. Does anyone else know you're here? He asked suddenly. No, I came alone from Manchester. Used the last of Mother's savings for the coach fare. Clara straightened in her chair. I don't want money, Your Grace, if that's what you're worried about. I came because Mother asked me to, because I thought you deserved to know what happened to the woman you loved. But I'll leave now. I can see this is painful for you, and I don't want to make it worse. Leave? Marcus stared at her. Miss Hastings, Clara, you're Isabel's daughter, her only child, her legacy. You wear her ring, carry her blood, and you think I'd let you leave to return to poverty and obscurity? He crossed to her, knelt down so he was eye level with her. "Your mother was the love of my life. She was stolen from me, violated, left to suffer for 20 years while I searched uselessly for her. I can't bring her back. I can't undo what was done. But I can give her daughter the life Isabel deserved, the protection and care she should have had." I don't understand," Clara whispered. "Stay, here at Ashmore Park. Let me provide for you as I should have provided for your mother. Let me give you the education, the position, the security that should have been your birthright." Marcus took her hands, those work-roughened hands so different from Isabel's soft, aristocratic ones. "You said your mother never married because she felt it would betray the man she couldn't remember. Let me honor that loyalty. Let me take care of the daughter she raised alone. People will talk. They'll say terrible things about why a duke is housing a young woman with no family, no connections. Let them talk. I've spent 20 years not caring what society thinks. I'm not about to start now." Marcus squeezed her hands gently. "Please, Clara, your mother is gone. I can't make amends to her, but I can make them to you. Stay." Clara looked at him for a long moment, this grieving man who'd loved her mother for 20 years, who'd never married because his heart had been buried with a woman who wasn't even dead. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll stay. For Mother's sake, and because I think she'd want me to know about the life she lost, the man she loved, the person she was before everything was taken. Then you'll stay as a guest, not a dependent. You'll have your own rooms, your own income, complete freedom to leave if you choose. But while you're here, I'll tell you everything about Isabel, who she was, what we meant to each other, the future we were supposed to have. You deserve to know your mother as more than the sad woman who sewed other people's clothes. Thank you, Your Grace. Marcus. Please, call me Marcus. We're beyond formality now." That evening, Marcus gave orders to prepare the best guest suite for Clara and sent for the housekeeper, Mrs. Brennan, to ensure his unexpected guest had everything she needed. He also sent an express to his solicitor in London and another to his closest friend, Lord Westbrook, explaining the impossible, miraculous, devastating situation. Then he went to his study, poured himself a very large brandy, and let himself feel everything he'd been holding back for 20 years. Grief for Isabel, the vibrant, laughing woman who'd been destroyed by violence and abandonment. Guilt that he hadn't protected her, hadn't found her, had lived in comfort while she'd suffered. Rage at whoever had taken her, hurt her, left her pregnant and alone. And underneath it all, a terrible, selfish relief that he finally knew. That the not knowing, the terrible uncertainty that had poisoned every day of the last 20 years was finally over. Isabel was gone, but her daughter remained. And Marcus would spend the rest of his life making sure Clara had everything her mother should have had. It was the least he could do, the only thing he could do. Clara Hastings had never seen a room like the one Mrs. Brennan showed her to. It was larger than the entire cottage shed shared with her mother in Manchester, decorated in soft blues and creams, with a 4-poster bed, a sitting area, and windows overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch forever. "His Grace wants you to be comfortable, miss," Mrs. Brennan said kindly. The housekeeper was in her 60s, gray-haired and efficient, with the sort of warm practicality that came from decades of service. "Ring if you need anything at all. I've sent a maid to draw you a bath, and dinner will be served at 8. His Grace mentioned you might not have brought much with you, so I've taken the liberty of having some day dresses sent up. They belonged to His Grace's mother. She was about your size. They're old-fashioned, but perfectly serviceable until we can have something made properly." Clara felt overwhelmed by the kindness, by the sheer luxury of the room, by the impossible reality that the Duke of Ashmore, the man her mother had loved and lost, had invited her to stay. "Mrs. Brennan, can I ask you something?" "Of course, miss." What was my mother like before she disappeared, I mean? Did you know her? Mrs. Brennan's expression softened with memory. I did, though I was just an under-housekeeper then, new to Ashmore Park, but everyone knew about Lady Isabel. She used to visit with His Grace before the wedding. She was lovely, miss, so full of light and laughter. She'd talk to the servants like we were people, not furniture. And the way she looked at His Grace, the housekeeper's eyes misted, like he hung the moon just for her. We were all so excited about the wedding. Then she vanished, and everything went dark. His Grace has never been the same. For 20 years, he's been a ghost in his own life. He never married, never even courted anyone seriously. Oh, society matrons threw their daughters at him for years, and there was pressure from the family to secure the line, but His Grace wouldn't hear of it. He said his heart was buried with Lady Isabel, and digging it up for duty's sake would dishonor her memory. Mrs. Brennan patted Clara's hand. Now you're here, wearing her ring, with her face in miniature. It's like she sent him a piece of herself from beyond the grave. I think it might save him, miss, or destroy him completely. Time will tell which. After Mrs. Brennan left, Clara sank into a chair and tried to process everything. 24 hours ago, she'd been Clara Hastings, seamstress's daughter, living in a rented room in Manchester with no prospects and no family. Now she was the daughter of a lady, loved by a duke, sitting in a palace surrounded by luxury she couldn't have imagined. And her mother, her quiet, sad, hard-working mother, had been Lady Isabel Pemberton, had been someone who mattered, someone who was loved, someone whose disappearance had shattered a man's entire life. Clara looked down at the ring on her finger, the sapphire that had been her mother's only treasure, the tangible link to a past Isabel couldn't fully remember. Now Clara knew the truth behind it, a love so deep that even 20 years and death couldn't diminish it, a tragedy that had rippled across decades, and a man who never stopped mourning. She slipped the ring off her finger and held it up to the fading light. Her mother's ring, her mother's love story, her mother's lost life, condensed into a circle of gold and a single perfect sapphire. "I found him, Mama," Clara whispered to the empty room. "I found the man who loved you, and I think you were right. He needs to know what happened, even if it breaks his heart all over again." Dinner that night was both intimate and surreal. Marcus had ordered it served in the small dining room rather than the formal one, making it feel less like a ducal household and more like, Clara wasn't sure what. A family meal, perhaps, though they were strangers, bound only by Isabel's ghost. Marcus had changed from his earlier formal attire into simpler evening wear, though even his simple clothes probably cost more than Clara had earned in a year. But he'd clearly made an effort to seem less intimidating, less remote. "I hope the rooms are suitable," he said as they settled into their seats. "Mrs. Brennan can arrange anything you need." "They're beautiful, more than I could have imagined." Clara looked down at the borrowed dress she wore, forest green silk that had been altered hastily to fit. "Thank you for the clothes, and for allowing me to stay." "It's not charity, Clara. It's—" Marcus struggled for words. "Closure, perhaps. Justice of a kind. I owe your mother everything, and I failed her. Letting you return to poverty when I can prevent it would be failing her all over again." They ate in silence for a moment. Then Clara asked, "Will you tell me about her? About who she was before?" Marcus set down his fork, and for a moment Clara thought he'd refuse. Then he began to speak, his voice soft with memory. "Isabel was 18 when we met. I was 32, a widower, actually. My first wife had died in childbirth 2 years earlier, along with the baby. It was an arranged marriage, cordial but not loving. I thought I was done with the idea of love, that duty was all I had left. Then I met Isabel at a ball. and everything changed. What was she like? Alive. That's the word that always comes to mind. She was so brilliantly alive that she made everyone around her feel more real, more present. She laughed easily, spoke her mind, had opinions about everything. She loved horses and books and terrible Gothic novels that I'd tease her about. She played piano beautifully and sang even though she was slightly off-key. She was kind to servants and sharp with fools, and completely unimpressed by my title. Clara smiled despite herself. She could see glimpses of that woman in her mother. The love of books, the occasional flash of dry humor, the quiet defiance of caring what others thought. We fell in love quickly, too quickly by society standards, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I wanted something beyond duty. I wanted her laughter, her sharp wit, her warmth. We were engaged within 3 months, married in 6. Or we were supposed to be. His voice went rough. June 15th, 1805. That was our wedding day. Instead, it became the anniversary of when I lost everything that mattered. What happened after she disappeared? How did you search for her? Marcus described the frantic investigation, the immediate search of London, the questioning of everyone who'd seen the abandoned coach, the Bow Street runners combing the countryside, the private investigators hired to search further afield. He'd spent a fortune, called in every favor, used every connection, but Isabel had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Her father, the Earl of Pemberton, died within the year. Heart failure, the doctor said, but I think it was grief. He'd lost his wife years earlier, and Isabel was his only child, his greatest joy. Losing her destroyed him. Marcus's voice was hollow. I'm not sure he ever believed she was truly gone. He kept expecting her to walk through the door, to explain it had all been a terrible mistake. He died still waiting. And you? Clara asked softly. What did you believe? I didn't know what to believe. Some days I thought she must be dead, that whoever took her had killed her and hidden the body. Other days I thought she'd been taken abroad, forced into some terrible situation I couldn't imagine. And on the worst days, I thought maybe she'd left willingly, that everything between us had been a lie, that I'd been fool enough to love someone who didn't love me back. She loved you, Clara spoke with absolute certainty. I never knew who you were, never knew your name, but I knew there was someone. Mother would get this look sometimes, especially near the end, when she knew she was dying. She'd touch her ring and whisper that she'd loved someone once, that somewhere in the fog of her lost memories was a man who'd made her feel precious. She said she hoped he'd found happiness, even if she couldn't. Marcus's hands clenched on the table. There was no happiness. There was duty and function and the endless gray blur of existing without living. Your mother was my happiness, Clara. When she disappeared, she took it with her. Then I'm glad she never knew that, Clara said quietly. It would have broken her heart to know you'd suffered as she had. They finished dinner in contemplative silence. Afterward, Marcus invited Clara to the library, a vast room lined floor to ceiling with books. He pulled down a leather-bound volume from a high shelf and handed it to her. This was Isabel's. She left it here during one of her visits before the wedding. I never opened it after she disappeared. It felt like a violation of her privacy. But you should have it. It's yours by right. Clara opened the book carefully. It was a journal, filled with Isabel's looping handwriting. The entries were dated from January to June of 1805, the months of her engagement. Clara flipped through the pages, seeing her mother's words leap out. March 3rd. Marcus took me riding today. He's teaching me to jump, though I'm terrible at it. He's so patient, never mocking, just encouraging. I think I'm falling in love with him, which is terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. April 12th. We argued today about Byron's poetry. I said it was melodramatic. He said it was passionate. We debated for an hour, and I've never felt more alive. This is what marriage should be. Two minds meeting, challenging each other, growing together. May 28th. The wedding is so close now, I can barely sleep. Sometimes I wake in the night terrified that something will go wrong, that I'll lose him, that this happiness is too perfect to last. But then morning comes, and Marcus sends flowers, or calls, or finds some excuse to see me, and I remember, this is real. He's real. We're going to have a lifetime together. June 9th. Tomorrow, the final fitting for my wedding dress. Mother would have loved to see me in it. I wish she were alive to meet Marcus, to see how happy he makes me. But perhaps she's watching from somewhere, pleased that her daughter found such love. Only 5 more days. 5 more days until I'm his wife, until we begin our forever. Clara's eyes blurred with tears. This was her mother, young, in love, blissfully unaware that tomorrow would be her last day of that uncomplicated happiness, that she'd never wear the wedding dress, never have the lifetime she dreamed of, never know the man she loved as anything but fragments and fog. She was so happy, Clara whispered. She had no idea what was coming. None of us did. Marcus stood at the window, his back to her. I've spent 20 years trying to understand why someone would take her. She had no enemies that I knew of. Her father wasn't particularly wealthy, so ransom made no sense. I wasn't important enough politically to make kidnapping my bride a strategic move. It was just evil, senseless, random evil. Or it wasn't random at all, Clara said slowly. What if someone did have a reason? What if there's something in her journal or in the investigation that explains what happened? Marcus turned to face her. I've read every report, questioned every witness, analyzed every detail 1,000 times. There's nothing, just a woman who vanished and 2 murdered men. But you read it as a duke trying to find his missing bride. I'm reading it as a daughter trying to understand her mother's life. Clara held up the journal. May I keep this? Read it properly. Maybe I'll see something you didn't. Of course, it's yours. Everything of Isabel's that remains is yours. Marcus moved closer, his expression earnest. Clara, I know this must be overwhelming. Yesterday, you were one person. Today, you're someone else entirely. If you need time to adjust, to think, to process, I need to understand, Clara interrupted. My whole life, I knew my mother was hiding something. I knew she was sad, knew she'd lost something important, knew I was somehow connected to that loss, even though she loved me. Now I know what she lost, but I don't know why. I need to know why, Marcus. I think we both do. He studied her for a long moment, seeing past the worn clothes and work-roughened hands to the sharp intelligence beneath. Isabel's daughter in truth, not in coloring or delicate features, but in that fierce need to understand, to make sense of senselessness. Then we'll search together, he said. Tomorrow, I'll show you everything, the investigation reports, the witness statements, the timeline of that day. Perhaps fresh eyes will see what mine couldn't. Thank you, Clara clutched the journal to her chest, for believing me, for caring about her still, after all this time, for wanting to know the truth. I never stopped caring, Marcus said simply. I never stopped loving her. Death I could have accepted, grieved, eventually moved past. But not knowing, that was the cruelest thing. Not knowing if she was alive and suffering, if she needed me, if she was calling out and I couldn't hear. For 20 years I've lived in that uncertainty. Now I know she suffered and I couldn't save her. But at least I know. At least the not knowing is over. Clara nodded, understanding in a way she couldn't have before coming here. Her mother had lived with not knowing too, not knowing who she'd been, who she'd loved, what life she'd lost. Perhaps not knowing was the truest tragedy of all. Good night, Marcus. Thank you for dinner, and for the journal, and for everything. Good night, Clara. Sleep well. But neither of them slept well that night. Marcus lay awake in his chambers, remembering Isabel, the real Isabel, not the ghostly memory he had held on to for 20 years. And Clara sat in her borrowed rooms, reading her mother's journal by candlelight, meeting the young woman her mother had been before tragedy reshaped her entire existence. Both of them, in their own ways, mourning the same woman and the futures that had been stolen. The next morning, Marcus led Clara to his study and unlocked a cabinet she hadn't noticed before. Inside were dozens of files, meticulously organized and labeled. 20 years of investigation, 20 years of searching, 20 years of hope gradually giving way to resignation. "This is everything," Marcus said, pulling out the files. The initial police reports, the Bow Street Runner investigations, the private detective agencies I hired later. Maps of where the coach was found, interviews with witnesses, timelines of Isabel's last known movements. I kept searching for years, even when everyone told me to stop, to accept she was gone. Clara settled into a chair and began going through the files systematically. The first document was the police report from June 10, 1805. Lady Isabel Pemberton departed Pemberton House at approximately 2 p.m. in the Earl's coach, accompanied by driver Thomas Garrett and footman James Hale. Destination: Madame Rousseau's dress shop on Bond Street for final wedding dress fitting. Coach found abandoned near Blackfriars Bridge at approximately 6 p.m. by night watchman. Driver and footman found dead inside, throats cut. No sign of Lady Isabel. Blood on the seats suggests violence. Investigation ongoing. Clara's stomach turned at the clinical description of violence. 2 men murdered, her mother taken. She forced herself to keep reading. The witness statements were frustratingly vague. A washerwoman near Blackfriars reported seeing the coach stopped with men around it around 4 p.m. but thought nothing of it. A shopkeeper remembered a closed coach traveling fast through his neighborhood around 5 p.m. A farmer north of London reported seeing a woman matching Isabel's description wandering his fields several days later, but by the time investigators arrived, she was gone. "That was probably her," Marcus said, reading over Clara's shoulder. "The timeline fits. If she was taken from Blackfriars and dumped somewhere north, she could have wandered until someone found her. But we searched every village, every farm, every possible location. She'd vanished." "Because she didn't know who she was," Clara said slowly. "She couldn't tell anyone she was Lady Isabel Pemberton because she didn't remember. And the people who found her probably didn't report it because an injured woman with no memory wasn't connected to a missing lady in London. They were separate events in everyone's mind except the people who took her." She turned to the next file. Witness descriptions of men seen near the coach. Several people reported seeing rough-looking men, possibly sailors or dock workers, near Blackfriars that day. One witness said they seemed to be waiting for something. Another said they saw men matching that description counting money later that evening at a tavern. "They were hired," Clara said with sudden certainty. "This wasn't random. Someone paid them to take her." She nodded grimly. "I came to the same conclusion years ago. But why? Who would want to kidnap Isabel? Her father had money, but not extraordinary wealth. I was important, but not politically powerful enough to make this worthwhile. And if it was personal, someone with a grudge, I never found them." Clara flipped through more pages, reading witness statements, investigator notes, maps with routes marked and crossed out. The sheer volume of effort Marcus had expended searching for Isabel was staggering. Had spent years and a fortune trying to find her, never giving up even when logic said she must be dead. Then Clara found a file marked Rejected Theories. Inside were notes about leads that had gone nowhere. A report that Isabel had been seen boarding a ship to France. Investigated, proved false. A claim that she'd been taken by white slavers, no evidence. A theory that she'd run away voluntarily, dismissed based on character witnesses. But one notation caught Clara's eye. It was in Marcus's handwriting, dated 1807, 2 years after the disappearance. Note: Lady Hartwell seemed unusually interested in the investigation, questioned me extensively about what we'd found. When I suggested the search was becoming hopeless, she seemed pleased. Likely means nothing, merely ghoulish curiosity. But her brother was one of Isabel's rejected suitors before our engagement. Follow up? Below that, in different ink, a later edition. Investigated. Lord Hartwell alibied for the day in question. Was at his club, witnessed by a dozen men. Dead end. Who was Lady Hartwell? Clara asked, pointing to the notation. Marcus frowned, clearly struggling to remember. Eleanor Hartwell. She is a fixture of society. Wealthy widow, known for her sharp tongue, and her brother, Viscount Hartwell. Why? Because you noted she seemed interested in the investigation, and her brother was a rejected suitor of my mother's. Half the men in London were rejected suitors at some point. Isabel was beautiful, wealthy, well-connected. She had plenty of offers before she chose me. Marcus shook his head. And Hartwell had an alibi. He was at his club all day. But did his sister have an alibi? Clara persisted. You said she seemed pleased when you talked about giving up the search. What if she knew something? Women don't arrange kidnappings and murders, Clara. They don't have the connections or the means. Don't they? Clara met his eyes. A wealthy widow with a brother in the House of Lords? A woman who moves in the highest circles? Who has access to information and people and money? Why couldn't she arrange it? Marcus stared at her, and Clara could see the thought taking root despite his skepticism. But why? What would she gain? I don't know, but we should find out. Clara pulled out her mother's journal, and we should cross-reference dates. If there's any mention of Lady Hartwell or her brother in here, it might give us a clue. They spent the rest of the morning going through the journal together, Marcus reading passages aloud, Clara taking notes. Isabel's entries were mostly about her growing love for Marcus, her excitement about the wedding, her daily activities, but there were occasional mentions of society events, names of people she'd encountered. Then, dated April 20th, 1805. Encountered Lady Hartwell at Lady Pemberton's musicale today. She was cold as always, barely spoke to me beyond the required pleasantries. Her brother, Lord Hartwell, cornered me by the refreshment table and made another offer for my hand. I declined as gently as possible. He's the third time he's asked since my engagement to Marcus was announced. He seems unable to accept that I've chosen someone else. Lady Hartwell overheard my refusal, and the look she gave me was pure venom. I told Marcus about it afterward, and he laughed, said Hartwell was harmless, just a fool who couldn't accept rejection. But there was something in Lady Hartwell's eyes that troubled me. It wasn't just disapproval, it was hatred. Clara looked up at Marcus triumphantly. She hated my mother, and her brother was obsessed with her. That's motive. It's a theory, Marcus said carefully, but it's been 20 years, Clara. Even if Lady Hartwell was involved, how do we prove it? The men who did the actual kidnapping are long dead or disappeared. The investigation is cold. We have no evidence. We have Mother's journal. We have your notes about Lady Hartwell's suspicious behavior, and we have time. Clara's voice was firm. I'm not saying we can bring anyone to justice, Marcus, but we can know. We can understand what happened and why. Isn't that worth pursuing? Marcus looked at this young woman, her mother's daughter in spirit if not appearance, determined to solve a mystery 2 decades old. He saw Isabel in that determination, in that fierce need for truth and justice. Yes, he said finally, yes, it's worth pursuing. Even if all we get is understanding, that's more than we've had for 20 years. Then where do we start? We start with finding out everything we can about Lady Hartwell and her brother. Their finances in 1805, their associates, their movements around the time of the kidnapping. I'll contact the investigator I used to employ, if he's still alive and working. And you should keep reading the journal. If there are more references to them, we need to know. Clara nodded, feeling a strange sense of purpose settling over her. She'd come to Ashmore Park to fulfill her mother's dying wish, to return the ring to the man who'd given it. She'd expected to deliver it and leave, returning to her quiet, poor life in Manchester. She hadn't expected this, a mystery to solve, a truth to uncover, and a grieving Duke who needed closure as much as she did. "Marcus," she said as he began gathering the files, "thank you for believing me, for taking this seriously. I know it must seem like a wild theory based on very little." "It's more than I had yesterday," Marcus replied. "Yesterday I had grief and resignation. Today I have a possible answer and someone to search for it with. That's not nothing." He met her eyes, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. She was Isabel's daughter, yes, but she was also herself, Clara Hastings, who'd survived poverty and loss, who'd learned to be strong because no one else would be strong for her, who was smart enough to see patterns others had missed. "Well, find the truth," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "For my mother's sake, and for yours. We'll find out what happened to Lady Isabel Pemberton." "Yes," Marcus agreed, "we will." Over the next 2 weeks, Ashmore Park became the headquarters of an investigation 20 years dormant. Marcus's old investigator, Mr. Edmund Shaw, turned out to be retired but willing to consult. He arrived 3 days after Marcus's letter, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a methodical mind. "Your Grace," Shaw said, settling into the study with the ease of long familiarity, "I never thought I'd be working this case again. Truth be told, I'd assumed Lady Isabel was long dead and the matter closed." "We have new information," Marcus explained, introducing Clara. "This is Miss Clara Hastings. She's Lady Isabel's daughter." Shaw's eyebrows rose dramatically. "Her daughter? Then she survived?" "For some years, yes. Long enough to raise a child and remember fragments of what happened to her." Marcus pushed the files across his desk. "We believe Lady Eleanor Hartwell and her brother, Viscount Hartwell, may have been involved in the kidnapping. Miss Hastings found references to them in Lady Isabel's journal that suggest animosity." Shaw pulled out a small notebook and began making notes. "Hartwell was alibied, if I recall correctly. Club witnesses put him there all afternoon." "But his sister wasn't," Clara interjected. "And Lady Isabel's journal suggests Lady Hartwell hated her." "Interesting." Shaw tapped his pencil thoughtfully. "Lady Hartwell. Yes, I remember her. She was one of the society ladies I interviewed at the time. Seemed appropriately shocked and concerned. But if she was hiding something, she hid it well." "Can you investigate her?" Marcus asked. Quietly, without drawing attention. "I don't want to accuse someone without evidence, but I need to know if there's truth to this theory." "I can investigate. It'll take time. We're talking about events 20 years past, records that may not exist anymore, people who may be dead or have no memory of the period. But I'll do what I can." Shaw looked at Clara curiously. "May I ask, miss, what prompted you to suspect Lady Hartwell specifically? There were dozens of people in Lady Isabel's social circle." Clara explained her reasoning. The notation in Marcus's files, the venom Isabel had described in Lady Hartwell's expression, the fact that the lady had seemed pleased when Marcus spoke of giving up the search. "It's circumstantial," she admitted, "but sometimes patterns matter more than individual pieces of evidence." "Well reasoned," Shaw said approvingly. "You have your mother's intelligence, I see. Lady Isabel was known for being exceptionally sharp. It's one reason her disappearance seemed so inexplicable. She wasn't the type to be easily fooled or overpowered. She was attacked by multiple men and drugged, Marcus said tightly. No amount of intelligence could save her from that. True enough. Shaw began packing up his notes. Give me 2 weeks. I'll look into the Hartwells' finances, their associates, any connections to the men suspected of the actual kidnapping. If there's a link, I'll find it. After Shaw left, Clara returned to her mother's journal. She'd read it cover to cover 3 times now, but each reading revealed new details. Her mother's voice came through so clearly in the entries, playful, thoughtful, deeply in love. It was painful to read, knowing how the story ended, but Clara couldn't stop. This was her mother as she'd never known her. Young, happy, full of hope. There were more mentions of the Hartwells scattered throughout the journal. Most were insignificant. Notes about encountering them at social events, brief descriptions of conversations. But one entry, dated May 30th, struck Clara as odd. Strange encounter today. Lady Hartwell approached me at the garden party and suggested in the sweetest possible tone that I should reconsider my engagement. She said Marcus was not the man I thought he was, that he had dark appetites that would horrify me. When I asked what she meant, she smiled and said I'd find out soon enough. I told Marcus about it later. He was furious, said Lady Hartwell had been spreading malicious rumors about him for years because he'd refused her advances when she was younger. He wanted to confront her, but I persuaded him not to. I don't want scandal so close to the wedding. But her words left me unsettled. What did she mean? Clara showed the entry to Marcus over dinner that evening. His face darkened as he read it. I'd forgotten about that, he said quietly. Isabel told me Eleanor had said something inappropriate, but I didn't realize she'd been that explicit in her slander. Dark appetites, as if I were some sort of monster. It was a lie, Clara, a vicious lie spread by a woman who'd propositioned me years earlier and been rejected. She propositioned you? When I was younger, newly widowed. Eleanor was already a widow herself, and she made it clear she'd be amenable to an arrangement. I declined as politely as possible. She never forgave me for it. Marcus set down the journal carefully. But spreading malicious gossip is a long way from arranging kidnapping and murder. Even if she hated both Isabel and me, would she really go that far? If she was unstable enough, perhaps, or if her brother was the driving force and she helped him. Clara leaned forward intently. Think about it, Marcus. Lord Hartwell was obsessed with my mother. He proposed multiple times, even after she was engaged to you. Lady Hartwell hated you both. You for rejecting her, my mother for choosing you. Together, they had motive, and Lady Hartwell had the social connections to find men willing to commit violence for money. But what was the end goal? If they wanted to separate us, there were easier ways. Scandal, for instance. Spread enough rumors and Isabel's father might have pressured her to break the engagement. Maybe they tried that and it didn't work. My mother loved you too much to believe gossip, so they escalated. Clara's voice was grim. And maybe the plan wasn't just to separate you. Maybe Lord Hartwell thought if my mother disappeared, he could find her, rescue her, make himself the hero of the story. She'd be grateful, dependent on him, maybe even marry him eventually. But he didn't find her. No one did, until it was too late, because she was found by someone else first, the tinker who took her to his sister. She disappeared into a different world entirely, one where ladies and viscounts don't exist. The plan failed, Marcus. They took her, hurt her, left her somewhere they thought they could retrieve her later. But she was found by the wrong people, taken too far away. And by the time Lord Hartwell might have looked for her, the trail was cold. Marcus stood abruptly and paced to the window. Outside, night had fallen over Ashmore Park, turning the gardens into shadows and moonlight. If you're right, If the Hartwells orchestrated this, then they're responsible for 20 years of suffering. Isabel's suffering, my suffering, your difficult childhood, even the Earl of Pemberton's death. They destroyed multiple lives out of spite and obsession. Yes, Clara said simply. And if we can prove it, we can at least name what happened. We can give my mother's story a clear villain instead of just random tragedy. Marcus turned to face her. You realize that even if Shaw finds evidence, even if we uncover the truth, we may not be able to bring them to justice. 20 years is a long time. Evidence degrades, witnesses die, legal options narrow. I know. But knowing is better than not knowing, for both of us. They held each other's gaze, these two people bound by Isabel's ghost and a shared need for truth. Slowly, Marcus nodded. Then we wait for Shaw's report, and we prepare ourselves for whatever he finds. Shaw returned exactly 2 weeks later, his expression grim. Marcus and Clara met him in the study, closing the doors for privacy. "What did you find?" Marcus asked without preamble. Shaw opened his notebook, but he didn't consult it. The information was clearly burned into his memory. "I found enough to convince you your theory is correct, though proving it legally would be nearly impossible now. Lord Hartwell died 10 years ago, and Lady Hartwell is in declining health at her estate in Cornwall. But the pattern is there, if you know what to look for." He laid out his findings methodically. In the months before Isabel's disappearance, Lord Hartwell had withdrawn significant sums from his accounts, amounts that matched with the men at the tavern had been seen counting. His correspondence during that period, which Shaw had managed to access through a cooperative antiquarian book dealer who'd purchased the Hartwell family papers, showed increasing agitation about taking action and not letting her throw herself away. More damning, Shaw had tracked down one of the men suspected of being hired for the kidnapping. He died in 1810, but before his death, he'd confessed to a priest that he'd been involved in snatching a lady for money. The priest, still alive and serving a parish in Essex, had refused to violate the confessional seal for years. But when Shaw explained that the lady's daughter was seeking answers, the elderly priest had confirmed that the dying man had spoken of being hired by a gentleman and his sister to take a lady going to a dress shop and leave her somewhere far where she'd be found eventually, but not too quickly. The plan was never to kill her, Shaw explained. Just to take her, hold her for a few days while they searched, then arrange for Hartwell to find her. She'd be traumatized, dependent, and her engagement to you would likely be broken out of scandal or her own emotional distress. Hartwell could then position himself as her savior and protector. But something went wrong, Clara said. Everything went wrong. The men they hired were more violent than intended, hence the murdered driver and footman, which wasn't part of the plan. They hurt Lady Isabel badly, panicked when they realized how injured she was, and dumped her by the roadside, hoping she'd die, and the whole thing would look like a robbery gone wrong. When she didn't die, but disappeared entirely, the Hartwells couldn't risk looking for her too hard without exposing their involvement, so they did nothing. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. They destroyed her life, destroyed my life, Clara's life, because of obsession and spite, and they got away with it. They got away with it legally, Shaw agreed, but they didn't get away with it personally. Lord Hartwell died alone, drunk, having gambled away most of his fortune. His last years were reportedly miserable, plagued by nightmares and a growing paranoia that he was being watched. And Lady Hartwell has been a recluse for the past decade, refusing visitors, supposedly suffering from a guilt-induced melancholia according to her household staff. They may have escaped justice, Your Grace, but they didn't escape consequences. Clara felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. They'd found the truth, identified the villains, understood the mechanism of the tragedy. But her mother was still dead, Marcus had still lost 20 years, and the people responsible were beyond legal reach. "What do we do with this information?" she asked. Shaw looked at Marcus. "That's for His Grace to decide. We could make it public, publish the findings, ruin what's left of Lady Hartwell's reputation. Or we could keep it private, knowing the truth but not weaponizing it. Lady Hartwell is elderly and ill. Pursuing her might feel like revenge, but it won't bring Lady Isabel back." Marcus was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "I want justice. God knows I want it. I want Eleanor Hartwell to pay for what she did, to suffer as Isabel suffered, as I suffered. But," he looked at Clara, "this isn't just my decision. Isabel was your mother, Clara. You have as much right to decide what happens next as I do." Clara thought about her mother, the woman who'd raised her with love despite the trauma that had stolen her past, who'd been kind even when life was cruel, who'd forgiven the world for what it had done to her. Would Isabel want revenge, or would she want peace? "I think," Clara said slowly, "that my mother would want us to be happy, to live the lives she couldn't. Pursuing Lady Hartwell, making this public, using what we've learned as a weapon, that keeps us trapped in the past. It makes the tragedy the center of our lives instead of something we've survived." She met Marcus's eyes. "You've mourned for 20 years. Maybe it's time to stop mourning and start living. Not forgetting, but not letting it consume you either. As for Lady Hartwell, she's old, sick, and, by Shaw's account, already suffering from guilt. Let that be her punishment. We don't need to add to it." Marcus studied her, this wise young woman who'd suffered her own hardships and emerged with grace and clarity. "You're kinder than I would be." "I'm practical. Revenge won't bring Mother back. It won't give you back the years you lost. But moving forward, building something new from what remains, that might actually honor her memory." Shaw cleared his throat diplomatically. "For what it's worth, I think Miss Hastings is right. Lady Hartwell is dying. Exposing her now would cause a scandal, but it would also hurt you both by dragging everything into the public eye again." "Sometimes the quieter form of justice is the most dignified." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we keep this private. We know the truth, we have answers, and we let the guilty parties face whatever judgment awaits them beyond this life. Shaw, I'll compensate you generously for your work, and I'll ask that you keep your findings confidential. Of course, Your Grace. It's been my honor to give you both closure, even if the truth is a difficult one." Shaw packed up his notes. "If there's anything else you need, you know where to find me." After Shaw left, Marcus and Clara sat in silence. The truth was out, the mystery solved, the villains identified. But knowing didn't erase the loss. It just gave it context. "What happens now?" Clara asked finally. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. Over the past few weeks, she'd become less of a stranger and more of a, what? A ward? A friend? A connection to the woman he'd loved and lost. "Now," he said carefully, "we figure out what our lives look like going forward. You came here to return a ring and deliver a message from your mother. You've done that. But I'd like you to stay, Clara. Not as a guest, not as a dependent, but as," he struggled for the right word, "family. You're Isabel's daughter. In a very real sense, you're the closest thing I have to the family I was meant to have with her. Stay at Ashmore Park. Let me provide for you properly. Give you the education and opportunities you deserve. Let me do for you what I should have done for your mother." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "That's generous, Marcus, but I don't want to be a burden or an obligation. I'm not Isabel, and I can't replace what you lost. I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to be yourself. Clara Hastings, who's smart and determined, and kind despite every reason not to be, who solved a 20-year-old mystery in a matter of weeks, who had the wisdom to choose peace over revenge. Marcus leaned forward intently. I've been half alive for 20 years, Clara, going through the motions of duty, managing the estate, existing but not living. You've reminded me that life continues, that there are still mysteries to solve and futures to build. Stay. Help me learn to live again. Clara wiped her eyes. For how long? As long as you want. Forever, if you'd like. I'm 52 with no heirs. If you stayed, I could make you my ward officially, provide for you in my will, ensure you never have to worry about security or survival again. You'd be free to marry whom you chose, pursue whatever interests you had, live whatever life you wanted, but you'd have Ashmore Park as a home base, a place of safety and belonging.
You do all that for the daughter of a woman you loved 20 years ago?
I do it because you're remarkable in your own right, and because doing it would honor Isabel's memory in a way that matters. She raised you alone, in poverty, and still managed to instill in you intelligence, integrity, and compassion. That's extraordinary. You're extraordinary. Let me give you the opportunities that should have been your birthright. Clara looked around the study, at the books and files, at the window overlooking gardens that stretched forever, at this man who'd loved her mother with a constancy that spans decades. Staying at Ashmore Park meant accepting a new identity, a new life, a new future. It meant letting go of being just Clara Hastings' seamstress daughter and becoming something more. But maybe that's what her mother had wanted when she'd given Clara the ring and made her promise to find its owner. Maybe Isabel had sensed, even through the fog of lost memory, that somewhere her daughter had a place waiting, a connection, a belonging, a chance at the life Isabel herself had lost. I'll stay, Clara said. Not forever, necessarily, but for now, until we both figure out what this should look like. And Marcus, thank you for caring about her, for caring about me. For wanting to turn tragedy into something meaningful. Thank you for giving me a reason to start living again. Marcus smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, the first Clara had seen from him. Now, shall we have dinner? And perhaps afterward, you can tell me about your life before you came here. I want to know about Isabel's daughter, not just Isabel's story. They moved to the dining room, and for the first time, their conversation wasn't about the past. Clara talked about her childhood, the villages they'd lived in, her mother's quiet strength. Marcus talked about managing the estate, his few genuine friendships, the routines that had kept him sane through years of grief. They were getting to know each other as people, not just as connections to a ghost. And in the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. They became friends. Marcus taught Clara to ride, showed her how to manage household accounts, introduced her to the vast library at Ashmore Park. Clara brought youth and energy to the estate, asked questions that made Marcus think, challenged assumptions he'd held for years. Mrs. Brennan commented to the other servants that his grace seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. The house itself felt different, still elegant and formal, but warmer, more alive. One evening, 2 months after Clara's arrival, they sat together in the library after dinner, comfortable in each other's silence. Clara was reading one of Isabel's beloved Gothic novels. Marcus was reviewing estate reports. The fire crackled pleasantly, and outside, rain pattered against the windows. "I've been thinking," Marcus said without looking up from his papers, "about introducing you to society. Properly, I mean, as my ward. There would be questions, of course, and gossip. There's always gossip. But if we controlled the narrative, presented you as the daughter of an old friend I'm honoring by providing for her education. Would that be wise?" Clara interrupted. "Society destroyed my mother. Why would I want to enter that world? Because you deserve more than hiding at Ashmore Park for the rest of your life. You're intelligent, articulate, perfectly capable of holding your own in any drawing room. And frankly, London society could use someone like you, someone who sees through their pretensions and doesn't particularly care what they think. Clara set down her book. You want to give me a season. I want to give you options. Marry well, marry for love, don't marry at all, but have the choice. Right now, you're dependent on my goodwill, which I'll always give, but that's not the same as having your own agency, your own position in the world. And if I don't want to marry, if I want to do something else entirely, study, travel, work,